Well, hello and welcome to the inaugural edition of D20 Helpdesk with myself, Oliver Dungeon Master, and my lovely guests this week, Max Caulfield and Alex Graham Bell. That's not their real last names, but I wasn't sure you guys wanted to use them, so I used some references from Life is Strange and General Science. Anyway, this show is essentially our segment to answer questions posed to us by you, our wonderful D20 viewers. We have the main topic this evening, which is all about world building. And then a few other questions you guys have asked us in the Discord. Now, Max himself is a more experienced dungeon master than I find myself to be.
That's a total lie. I've been playing D&D for a few years since high school, maybe about 8 years at this point. I've only recently started DMing as of about mid-2017, but I do have a lot of experience in 3.5 and playing 5th edition. So I've seen a lot of different DM tactics.
Oh, and you will have seen both these people in our live stream games. Alex plays in Eyes of Elisia, and Max plays in the Black Winter Nights, and I DM those. Alex himself is a newer DM. How long have you been DMing for?
Maybe 6 months or so, I think, is probably it's about the estimate that I'd say that I've been DMing for. I've had a huge passion for Dungeons & Dragons for a few years now, just really didn't have the group to sort of find myself in.
Cool.
Once I moved to Wellington, I found myself playing in my first ever game, which was actually Ollie's. And then I started my own game not that long after that, and
Yeah. In fact, I play Druid called Cloud in his game. And me and Max actually meet regularly to discuss Dungeon Master tips and how
Ways to kill the players.
Yeah, how to instigate a TPK, what kind of emotional torture that you can make them endure, that kind of stuff. So that's us. That's us. Now let's get to your questions. So the main question of this evening, which is how do you go about building a world, was posed to us by Dungeon Master, I do believe, who is one of our lovely people out there in the cybersphere who communicates with us. So, world building, alright. Okay. So, essentially, you're starting from scratch. Now, I find sometimes when inspiration is lacking, even though I run a homebrew campaign, opening up a pre-gen book, like Tomb of Annihilation or something, reading through that, is a great way to get started and get the ball rolling in terms of ideas.
Well, I mean, the good thing about playing a homebrew game is you don't necessarily have to create absolutely everything from scratch. You can steal from this and that and the other thing. I've stolen a few things from, like, Game of Thrones, to name one. Matt Colville's world.
All hail
my boy.
Yeah. I've stolen a couple of names and things from his world to sort of just give my world a little bit more flavour. Just different histories and stories and things that I've heard from, like, World of Warcraft, those sorts of...
Yeah, I know just World of Warcraft.
And you just change, like, little bits and pieces and take creative liberty. I guess is the best way to...
Well, that's exactly how I started the first ever campaign, which was Black Winter Nights that I ever did. I took the Sword Coast and changed Neverwinter Castle to Blackwinter Castle and Luskin to Duskin. And that's where I started. And then from there, I kind of just built outwards. The players would say something like, what's further south? If we were to travel down that road, what will we find? And I think to myself, God, I have no idea. But and then once you've done that a few times, you kind of get the reoccurring stuff. The forests, the mines, if there are, dwarves nearby, castles and... Yeah, little taverns and inns. I suppose knowing a world first, knowing what makes up a world, farmland, and all the things that are necessary is an important part of world building.
I was just going to ask, Alex, so Oliver has said that he had a map to draw from initially from the Sword Coast Guide. You said you've drawn from several different sources of inspiration, stories, games. Yes. How did you design it into, like, a world, like a continent? How did that happen?
So, genuinely, the way that I designed my world was I started with a pen and paper, and I just drew a squiggly outline that turned out to be a continent, right? And then I was watching a few of Matt Goldberg's videos. I was watching, just taking inspiration from a whole number of different sources and going, oh, I really like that name. I'm going to make a city based on that. And like Matt Colville did like a whole series. We could possibly put a link down in the description.
On such a good series.
Yeah, on building a world from scratch. And I was sort of watching some of that, and like it was with his viewers and things, and a whole heap of names came through. I was stealing them. He was creating all these different societies, and I'd be like, oh, I don't really like that, but I might take one of the other two suggestions that popped up. Yeah. So
one of the things I admire most about your game is the level of detail in terms of the kingdoms themselves. They have a long-standing backstory of each other. The kingdoms know how they feel about the other kingdoms. So do the lords and ladies. They have opinions on the other kingdoms as well. That kind of adds like a sense of realism to it, I guess. When you kind of think of what are the motivations of these castles as well, not just where they are. I actually had done the same thing and done an outline when I first did the rest of who cast.
Yep.
Started with the outline, and then little circles that just said, and sometimes I'd only have a name.
Yeah.
The City of Illusion, or this or that. And yeah, build from there.
And the thing is, when I was creating my world, I would create a name first, and then I'd sort of work backwards and sort of go, right, why is it named that?
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
For example, I have a place in my world called Salem's Rest, and it turned out to be like I just named it Salem's Rest, and I did a little bit more thinking and decided Salem was maybe a founder for a particular church or religion, and then built a religion around that. That's how I ended up with the god Arcturus.
Yeah, nice.
Well, see,
I
for
like
you
that.
guys, I've just created, for both of you guys actually, in the new story arc, I've created an entire continent called Sinjera. This time round, it was a bit quicker. I started with kingdoms of men and elves and dwarves, because that was some stuff. But then, essentially, I had the Warlands, which you guys are quite interested in. In fact, we were trying to get to the Warlands.
Yeah.
Now, that originally was just the name. I thought that sounded cool, and I wanted like a land that was full of turmoil and current conflict. I thought Warlands cool. And then I really didn't think about it much for the next couple of days while I was working on other stuff, and inspiration struck one night as I was drifting off into Sleepland, and the chattering, the chattering minds of the conscious was kind of just rattling around, and suddenly went, oh my god. And it was actually the idea of how to relate the Warlands to what's going on in the rest of the continent. So once you've got a few things established, I find it's easier to branch off from them and say, well, the Kingsguard here, they're going to need a place to scout, or these guys are going to need, where do they get their weapons from? And then where does the weaponsmith get his ore from?
Exactly. I think we could do a whole nother video on politics, organizations, and the economy. I use that as a basis to decide what each of the major cities are going to do. I had quite a different starting tactic for a map from both of you guys. I initially did find a map that I liked when I first started off, and this was actually a section from a world map of the Elder Scrolls games. And I used part of the Black Marshes, and I just outlined that, made a couple of edits with a pencil. That was when I first started DMing due to university and other things. That stopped for a while. When I picked it back up a few months later, I was redesigning the world, and I wanted to have a similar continent shape, and I used a program called Hexographer, which is really handy. Matt Colville has a whole video on how to use that, really great. And I designed a rough shape of the continent, including islands and things, and I took out, separated, created rivers, that kind of stuff. And then I added geological and geographic structures. Here are mountains, and the northern regions it's going to be Arctic, here are coasts.
Maybe a desert.
Exactly. You have all these different areas, and I already had a rough idea of a political climate I wanted to create, which was essentially inspired by Cold War Germany, which I find fascinating. I'm a German student. And I had an idea of how I wanted to have these places located, each in very different geographic locations, different climates. So who would be living in this kind of climate, what kind of people could be found here, are they good with ships, are they going to be taking over these islands? From there I just started creating names. If I couldn't think of one, I found, this was actually a really great tip that I saw somewhere online. I found obscure names from Russian towns, and I just used those for areas that have names that I think would sound similar to Russian. So the classic example is Dwarvish.
In fact, Dothraki, if I'm not mistaken, was actually a combination of Arabic, Hebrew, and Russian. One thing that I've been doing secretly in the new story arc is a lot of the names, or 90% of the names of places, are actually names and words in other languages. That may or may not hint at what's really going on in that place. But see, one of the things for me is the rush of inspiration. If you guys remember Anthony Robbins, the motivational speaker, he often said that motivation is the spark, but you really need planning and schedules to get it done. So when I have an idea, a while ago I was thinking subterranean, suddenly my mind just clicked and went, well, under the ground of all these kingdoms and places, it's not just going to be dirt, I've decided. No, there's got to be some underground stuff, and then immediately my mind was like, okay, well, what lives underground? And then I had this rush of inspiration. I had to get out of bed and run to the computer and turn on the monitor and kind of groggily, drearily just hammer away at a keyboard for half an hour. Sleep be damned. But sometimes it's a simple idea, and once you get that rolling, that can lead to just more expense. Like when I realised deserts were a thing, I created the Desert of the Uncrossable Storm, which later became a huge part of the story for Maple. So sometimes it's just a small thing, and other times I will legitimately go out there with an intention of stealing inspiration. One of the great things that helps is the fact that we do Dragon Tavern, where we review old old Dungeons and Dragons cartoons and movies, and all things like that. So even watching those movies from the 80s, you kind of, once the kingdom's been thought out well by a writer or a creator, just to view it and just to see it and kind of put yourself in the shoes of the people that live there adds that kind of depth. So not just a castle, but the people within the commoners and the lords and the places they go. It's all about that detail. So that can come from anywhere.
So we've talked a little bit about like how we can how you take inspiration from other things and build a world, but how does it relate to like the players? How do you sort of get your players equally involved in your world so that they, for example, in my world, I have a lot of knowledge in my head that I sometimes forget that players like don't know, and I kind of struggle sometimes to be able to structure the story in a way that the players are going to understand and enjoy. So how do you relate the content that you've got in your head to the players and sort of show that to them in a simple way that they can grasp and go with?
I'll give you an example. When one of the players in Eyes of Elisia picked up herbology, I kind of hinted at the fact that, hey, you could be a herbalist if you wanted to. And they really went with it. And they thought, wow, it's amazing. So now when I'm creating lands and stuff, what I actually do once I've got a basic kind of outline, I just meditate. And the first thing I meditate on is the people, the main people of that city. Then I kind of think about the quests that are available. I think about, their motivations, the religion, the politics of that city. And then I just sit and individually meditate on each individual character. Like for your character, Nicholas, I thought one of the most important things would be the stars, as you are a bit of a stargazer in terms of the story. So I thought, okay, well, what if I put this continent way on the other side of the world where there's a different set of constellations and stuff? And then I was thinking about Maple, who enjoys herbology, and I thought, okay, well, I'll create new plants and put them in the world. So it was really just a conscious effort, and going player by player by player. Raiko, for example, there's a lot more bards in this world, and there's a lot more bard training in this world, actually because of Xanathar's Guide. Has some wonderful stuff for bards. So it was actually just a one at a time, and then just adding little dots and little flourishes, just little bits of colour to what I already had.
So what you might suggest then is like a session 0 where you get to know your players, especially if you haven't met them before, and discuss the tone of the campaign, that kind of stuff, what they want to see in it, and then also, I guess before they even bring the characters to the table, if you can, discuss what their interests are going to be, if they have a particular heritage that they want to follow, that kind of stuff. And if you've already got the landscape, you can just kind of sew that right into places that you have marked.
I'd say from learning from experience, with a little bit of a hiccup in my first session, I'd say, actually I kind of lost my train of thought.
That train has sailed.
What was I going to say?
So the next step for me, so the next step for me after that, once I've got the world and I've got how the characters relate to it, obviously it needs to be populated with monsters. And what I've been doing recently is just literally flicking through the monster manual just at random. And being like, an adult red dragon, okay, that's bad for you guys. No, it would be more like, hey, a yucky warrior. And even just like the pictures, that's just like, okay, well, that's finely crafted elven stuff, it's a set that matches. That gives me 2 ideas straight off. A shop that sells such fine craft that they're actually making a lot of gold off it. And the other thing that it makes me think of is the fact that it's a set. What he's wearing all matches. So maybe like there could be armour in my world that gives you set bonuses. Well, it could be, so just like... And then sometimes when I'm doing that, just flipping through this and Volos, I'll just fall upon a page and I'll just look a monster in the eye and I'll just go, that's it. That's exactly what's hiding under the rock, by the riverbed.
You will be the club with which I beat my players. One thing on that note, if you're having trouble trying to flesh out a world and continent cities that aren't just filled with humans of different sorts and you don't know what's going to be in the environment, the Dungeon Master's Guide has a really handy chapter. If you hand it over...
It's one of these ones, there you go.
Yep, it's just at the back. They have a section of monsters by environment.
Yes, man, and Volos does this
helpful
as well.
Yeah.
That was actually a huge part of Sinjera. Was going by environment, and the most useful thing that I came across was trying to decide on monsters.
So it's got Arctic, coastal, forest. I'm just reading off the list here, but it also sorts them by challenge rating, and it also has things like commoners and some of the NPCs that you'll find there. And I think there's even like a major city one somewhere. Anyway, you get the idea.
Another huge tool is networking with other people that are creatively minded. Our sessions at Expressaholics, that really helped me write. Because you've got some amazing stuff that I just never thought about, in terms of the depth of the story of your monsters and the layers. It just kind of really it gets my mind travelling. Afterwards I'm just at home just writing page after page after page.
So I think I sort of remember the thing that I was thinking of before.
Sure.
When you start your game, there's a little bit of confusion for the players because they're starting new characters, they're still not quite sure how to play it, they're coming into a world that they don't quite understand yet. So how do you introduce them to the world? That's my question.
That's a really good question.
Because in my world, I sort of just chucked you guys like straight into it and kind of had to deal with the backlash with the next couple of sessions afterwards. It took a while for you guys to sort of get into it and sort of start understanding my world.
It was the same thing with Sinjera. I had all that information that I threw at you guys in my head, and it was intended to come out a lot slower, but you guys were asking questions and it just kind of rushed out, and then I was like, oh god, that's... like you can't... That's too much. You're not going to be able to absorb all that. But yeah,
how would you introduce...
I have two things, one of which I've taken great inspiration from Matthew Mercer, and if you've seen the first episode of the second campaign arc of Critical Role, there's basically a big exposition chapter right at the start before they even introduce what's going on. And I started the same way. In the campaign I'm starting with my characters, it started in a tavern. They were in the middle of a festival of games that happened there called the Iron Gut Marathon. This is a tiny hamlet. It was a mining village, one of several in that region, which is largely cold and arctic near the mountains. Some of them had come from different places, so when I introduced some of the characters, I said they'd come from this place, or I discussed early with the characters if they didn't want to say because they had secret names and were escaping the law, that kind of stuff. I discussed with them where they could have come from. So everyone either through a little bit of discussion previously, or in that moment where I introduced a big facade of characters which basically just represented different places that they come from, and talked about the region, why people were there. It's a small mining village, but people come to this place because it was established after a great war. So the actual tavern was an old barracks that had been bought out by a portly gentleman of noble birth who then became a tavern owner and in his spare time just sits around drinking. So I just had this idea of a character who was kind of out of place in a hard-working mining village. Bam, tavern owner, why do people come here? What is the economy? What's going on here? What is the interaction with other people? People come from these places, that kind of stuff.
Another thing that I often do, especially with a one-shot, or if it's the very first session, I do the story. The exposition about maybe the history of the world, which I think we should talk about as well, trying to add
that's a good one.
because it's not just the place where the players find themselves is not just what's happening at that time. Another really powerful tool in your arsenal is what happened in the last 4,000 years before they arrived. But what I do is, for example, I have all the party split into individuals, and then I just have a very classic quest for each character type. Right at the start, the rogue has to steal something, the barbarian has to kill someone, and the ranger has to find an animal. That kind of stuff. Because that, especially
so something that you can sort of let your players sort of play around with some of the skills that they've got. So that makes sense.
And then also, it's that thing of it's the thing of what you want the tone of the world to be, and then there it's just a simple quest of how to engage that. For example, I've played in games where the tone was very, very serious. Your consequences had dire repercussions, and if you stuck around, you know who this is, isn't it?
I almost died.
I did die. Not
your rogue was hanging from
the castle walls. And then so serious ramifications for just trying to steal some wine. But
so that's actually a really good point, is sort of letting your players know what they can't do in the world, especially because they're sort of first level, when you're starting a new game, your players might want to be like, I want to try and pick this lock and steal all the gold from the inside of this tavern. And they get caught because they're level 1. And now the DM has to deal with the consequences that, that player had. So it's really important I think it's really important to really show your players, have them know what they can and cannot do so early in the game.
Exactly.
And that's why I really liked Olivia Nellie's campaign. Olivia in Eyes of Elisia as well. She's just started up her first campaign. She's probably going to do it every month or so. And what I really enjoyed about her first session was that she gave us the chance to sort of play around a little bit in the world. Trying out some things without consequence. She found a creative way to do that.
Oh wow!
She created some little mini games and things at a fair where they create little.
That's what I did with the Tavern Iron Gut Marathon. It was the same thing. Each of the basically the what are they called? Games that they had to succeed in as a group were kind of tailored towards a particular type of character.
So she created all these little things so that you could sort of try out some, just play the game, play with it, have fun, not actually just sort of sit there and go along with the story. And then towards the end, she gave us a couple of puzzles and things that we had to solve. And then at the very end of the game, we were like, okay, this is what we have to do. This is what the campaign is probably likely to and we were all on board.
Yeah, it was a really well
Yeah,
done
it's
way of
really
doing it. Do you remember the session last week when you guys were introduced to the Omen?
Yes.
That was actually me introducing you to the tone of the world.
I see.
That is the kind of level of
Okay.
chauvinistic grit that's in Sinjera.
Yeah.
So that was a conscious effort, obviously. Now, we've got some time left, not a huge amount of time, but I'd love to talk about just the history of a world. Essentially, we've given some ideas on finding the conventions of what's in a world for us and such, building outwards from that, building under where inspiration strikes, meditating, that kind of stuff.
Can I start off with this section and saying that you do not have to know every ounce of history in the world that you're creating. I still know jack shit about about the history of my world.
Yeah.
I know, like you said, you knew like 100 years war had happened and previously to your world, but like all I knew was the cities really and the names and the characters that were in it, and I sort of fleshed out the history a little bit later.
Yeah, no, same. Do you remember the Age of Dragons as part of the lore? That was not at the start at all. That was halfway through the story. I just kind of added it. So yeah, you're absolutely right. You don't have to know everything. And sometimes you'll create an NPC or something, and you'll think, well, where did they come from? And that will lead to you.
Exactly.
Following that trail is really good. I have another topic we should talk about after this, which would be note keeping as well. I'm sure that'll be interesting for people. But coming back to this one, I have to agree with the gentleman beside me. I haven't even fleshed out a creation myth in my world, but I've managed to avoid having that come up by keeping them engaged in the current political climate or in the troubles that I threw at them because I'm a bad person.
Well, one of the things that actually led me to discover more of the lore of the world and create it was the fact that early on you guys liked to steal books and read books.
Yeah.
You'd go into a library and you just pull books off the shelf and start reading. I mean, we did that in your campaign as well. And that's where the Book of Arton came from, Salandria, which turned out to be a really important part of the lore later on. But yeah, it was like a small moment that happened in game.
So if you have like a little idea and your players sort of want to go, I want to find a book in the library. If you have something in the back of your mind, you can be like, okay, that's going to be what's in this book, and you can sort of explain it a little bit, even if it's the only little detail you have.
Yeah.
By chance, this just happened to be the book that you found. So.
Yeah. And it does, and even if it's something as simple as the king of this castle, what was his father's name? Yeah. Like if you know that just adds a bit of depth. Yeah. It makes it a little more believable.
One other thing I was going to say as far as fleshing out a world and some history behind it, the way that I did this, I had an idea of the political climate, so I knew roughly it was going to be a kind of sundered empire, and there were going to be different disjointed organizations and political groups all around the continent. So when I actually had the world mapped out, I started naming places, and as Alex was saying earlier, I went backwards saying, why is it named this? Like I have a small secluded island called Talarin's Throne, and Talarin was an old elven lord. And this is in a region called Firefall, which has a coast called the Black Sands. Why is it called Firefall, and why is it called the Black Sands? Well, the players haven't got there yet, but it is because there was an enormous dragon that crashed and died there and has forever scarred the landscape.
Nice.
So just work backwards. Once you have geological and geographic details that you think are interesting, here's a volcano. Why is it there? Birthplace of dragons. Why not? Build off that. Build history, put names, and then just work backwards. Work off the inspiration you've got.
And then also just take small things that happen and elaborate on that and do that as well. How did you come up with the way the kingdoms felt about each other in your world? Because I found that fascinating.
Well, the way that I did that was because I'll see if I can shorten this story. I was sort of thinking about one particular NPC, right? This NPC is quite crucial to one of the players. I won't say who.
Okay.
But I sort of wanted to know why he was thinking the way that he was thinking, and the only way that I could sort of justify it was that something big had happened in his past that had affected not only his life but millions of others.
Nice.
So I sort of went a little bit backwards. So that's affecting, let's say, two groups of people, two kingdoms, and one kingdom is afraid of whatever this is. Can't speak. One kingdom is afraid of magic because this is the consequence of what has happened. The other kingdom, which was quite well developed in magic, found a cure very quickly. This has created some conflicts because one kingdom that isn't particularly magically inclined now fears the arcane group because it seems as if... Am I being too vague?
No, this is
You
good.
understand what I mean?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it brings up a good question about if you're going high fantasy or low fantasy as well, and how that affects the climate and politics, but we can talk about that another time.
Yeah. Another thing, the last thing that I think we'll close on for this topic is just time. You know, you take the only reason Sinjera has a lot of stuff going on is because I spent 2 months, like a month and a half, 2 months at my computer, just writing a lot.
I'd say, in short, if you wanted to like take a few things away from this video, how to plan for your campaign, write your players' handouts is what I'd say.
That's really useful.
Because I didn't do it, but I felt afterwards I kind of needed to, just so that your characters can know a little bit more about the history and have that knowledge on hand. So if they're like, oh, I heard like the DM just said that name, let me see okay, so that's what he's referring to.
Yeah,
that's really good.
Yeah, so like write some handouts for your players so that they understand your world a little bit better. What was the next topic we talked about? I'm so forgetful.
I guess time, but one thing that I work with as well with this is I have like one short page of badly written notes in my monkey handwriting. But if you feel comfortable improvising part of this and you've got a rough idea of what the world is going to be like, just go with it. Just remember you've got keywords and names that like I have highlighted here.
Yeah.
And that means I can just come back and if I need a minute from my players, I'll just go 1 second, allow me to review the political climate of the sector at the moment and check it. But you said you spend a lot of time writing a lot, so how do you store those notes really quickly?
Oh yeah, so I have everything numbered. So basically Dulce Verne, 06, the Taverns Within, 06A, 06B is the shops. I have that all, in the top right of the page. I just flip right to it. If you go, who's this NPC, it's all.
See, I work the other way around. If you want, like for example, in my world, you wanted to know the name of the inn, and I said it was the Dragon Vase Inn. It was the first thing that popped into my head, and it described like this little jade vase at the sitting at the top of it, and then you write the history for it.
Yeah, cool. All right, so that's the main topic. That's the main question that we wanted to cover on this episode of D20 Helpdesk. We'll also just go through a couple of quick fire questions which you guys threw at us in the Discord. One from Zach: how do you use/avoid using cliches? I think just like an answer each. How do you avoid using cliches, or how do you use doing it? Well, I find that a lack of knowledge really helps. I don't know what's a cliche because I don't know what the hell's going on.
Yeah, that's true. As a new DM, I sort of didn't really know what was considered a cliche and what was.
Okay.
So I just ignored it. I just sort of went with whatever was a cliche, and because what's wrong with cliches? Cliches are cliches for a reason. I love them. And I love starting in a tavern. I love all those sorts of...
The king who's actually a wyvern.
Yeah.
I think with cliches, I've seen a few of them over the years, and I've seen DMs avoid them in spectacular, amazing fashions. I think a way to go through it is if it's a cliche about an NPC or like goblins are always evil, that kind of stuff, think about why that might be. If you can give a reason for a cliche and you want to keep it, like because they are all born of an evil god that was blah 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 blah, or you can always put that on its head and say, well, there's no real reason for them to be like that, so why shouldn't
or make a really nice god.
Exactly.
Another way you can sort of challenge cliches is sort of think about the races or the classes in your world and think about how they can be flipped on their head. For example, in my world, dwarves, instead of having like this really stocky, like, I guess like Russian-esque or like Viking feeling, they're Grecian. They're like, like taking Grecian inspiration and sort of giving them like those flowing white, what are they called?
Robes.
That'll do.
I know what you were thinking of, and I can...
Well, see, for example, in Sinjera, a lot of the rogues and thieves, really nice people. So, other question that we want to go through is from Trixer. Thank you, Trixer, for asking this in the Discord. Just a basic rundown on how we set up encounters. Now, we could do an entire video on this, and maybe we will at some point. Basically, how to set up an encounter. This is hard because you never know what your players are going to do.
Yeah. See, in my game, all my players have particularly good stats, so I can't really use the challenge rating thing very well, because first of all, there's more of you, and second of all, you're more powerful than an average third level character. So I sort of have to scale things up, but if you think that your characters aren't quite strong enough, give them more hit points, give them +2 weapons, just little things that are probably going to make the odds stack against them a little bit more. Have them easy to hit, I think, is probably the best way, because players love hitting things.
Yeah, it's better to have more
and just
hit
give
points.
them lots more hit points.
No, with you on that.
Yeah, if they're finding that this creature might be a little bit too difficult, well, you can either scale it back. You can go, instead of it being like a D8 damage, you do a D6.
Yeah.
Or
I think it really comes down to knowing your players as well. I think it took me ages to get to the rhythm of like, okay, this is the kind of strength that I can throw at them. One thing that I actually do is I just decide at the start, is this going to be a social or a combat encounter?
Nice.
And right from there, obviously, tons of times a social turned into a combat and vice versa. But I kind of think, what was the last big encounter my players had? That was a combat. Okay, we'll try and throw some social at them. And then from there, it's just back to the inspiration thing, I guess.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. I think that's a really good point we touched on here, that you should know your players. I think for the first encounter, or maybe the first couple, using the CR charts is a good idea, and you can really get a rough idea of what the party should be coming up against at that level. Look at how to allocate the CR rating for different enemies based on how many there are. Once you get a feel of how strong they are, or if you're experienced with a lot of players, you've been on that side of the table like I have, then you know roughly what the players can do. And Matt Colville makes a really great video about this as well. You can build encounters not so much using the CR table, although that is a good place to start. You can use it based off what you think is going to be challenging or too easy for your players. But I made a really quick systematic breakdown of this. I know we're pressed for time, so I'll try and be fast.
Sure.
On making an encounter. So first of all, if you're starting from scratch and you have no idea what to throw at your players when they're coming up to a place where you think they could or should be an encounter, look at the environment. What is the environment? Refer back to the Dungeon Master's Guide, that enemies by area and environment. Check that. Get some inspiration from that. Is there a narrative or historical reason for something unusual? Is there a lord there? Is there a mind flayer taking over Kuator like it was underneath the mining village in my starting area? What is involved? Are there just two factions, the players and everyone else? Is it good and bad? Or do you flesh out the ecology? I had a big subterranean ecology really fleshed out. I had a whole lot of mushroom people, mycenids. I had two Kuator factions, one that was taken over by the mind flayer and one that was potentially allied, as well as small roaming creatures that were in the area. So there doesn't have to be just the two clear-cut factions. There can be other things like roaming opportunists. I had a ranger who was sniping from a fairly guarded position. He thought the wizard saw something moving in the distance behind him. He didn't pay attention. He was later grabbed by a growl, which is a big floating brain with tentacles.
Well, see, I think you're totally right, and I think that's also another important thing to think about in world building. It's not always just evil and good factions. Like in the forest, there's multiple tribes. They all feel differently about the world. We will kind of wrap up there. I'd say just add one more thing to you, which was know your players' hit points and AC. That's a really good way, and have a good idea of their weapons, because with that information in front of you, it makes creating a monster a lot easier.
Actually, yeah, that's a really good idea, because then you could sort of think, alright, so this character's got the most hit points, I'm going to target him first, if you want to make it a little bit easier. Or if you sort of want to think a bit more tactically for your bad guys, you can go, okay, I'm going to attack the wizard first, because he's squishy, and my NPC, my enemy, is kind of smart and can see it.
And another thing about encounters, make them mixed up. You guys, I think, mentioned that just going into a room with this one bad guy, okay, it's fun fighting him, but it's not as fun as if there's also a hill giant and a couple of goblins and traps that are in the room as well. So try to make it fresh and varied, Well, that's it for the first inaugural episode of the D20 Helpdesk. Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you so much, Alex, for taking time out of your busy schedules to come here and talk to us. We're playing tomorrow night. Black Winter Nights. Be prepared. Oh my god, I've got some cool stuff to throw at you.
It's good.
I've really been fleshing out more of the world where you are, so I'm really looking forward to that. We just want to say thank you very much for watching. If you want questions, if you want to pose questions to us for us to answer on the next D20 Helpdesk, then just post them in the comments below, or jump in our Discord, the D20 Multiverse, where me, Dave, the players and stuff, we all hang out and chat. Some of our fans want to dialogue with us about what's going on, all that kind of stuff. So jump in there if you want to. Check out if you have questions you want to email to us. It's just d20multiverse@gmail.com. They come straight through to us, and we'll put them in the next video. Thank you guys so much, Dungeon Master, Zach, and Trixer, for your questions for this episode. Thank you guys again. And hey, thanks for supporting the D20 Multiverse. We really enjoy bringing you our content. So for myself, Oliver Dungeon Master, have a good day, evening, afternoon, wherever you are in the world.
Catch you later.